Hey folks, welcome to Magic the Gathering for Advanced Players. I'm Matt Sperling. We're talking today about Throne of Eldraine Standard, but as usual, we're taking something that's current or recent and using it as a lens into something bigger. How should we be thinking about Magic? How should we be preparing? How should we be strategic? So what does that mean for this standard? At this stage, it's a new format. We're going to talk about what does it mean to draw some conclusions in an early format, and what are some things that conclusions we can make that are actually going to be valid, in the weeks and months to come, and not just a snap first impression. Let me get over to this. So first of all, why is this a moment in time where the format's new? Well, it's rotating. What'sinstandard.com has been a helpful guide for me. When exactly do things rotate? Here you can see there's a bunch of sets going out, and there's Throne of Eldraine coming in with more sets to follow, but those aren't out yet. So when you're at this moment in time, it's kind of like this very blurry picture of what the new format's going to be, but you can still see kind of what are the biggest objects, or what are the most important cards, what are the most important themes or concepts. Is there a combo deck that's clearly good? Is there a control deck that's clearly good? Are there cards that are really sticking out? And in this standard, for me, it is some of those big, huge objects that I can see, even though it's blurry. I don't know exactly what cards are going to be paired with them. I don't know exactly what other strategies are going to emerge, are going to compete with them. But some of those big things are just like single cards that are so cheap and efficient that they're kind of warping everything else, or at least they're standing out. The first one is a card that warped the last standard, had the same effect, where it just sits there as a possibility. Even my opponents who don't play Ferry Time Raveler in their deck, the fact that they could have impacts the decisions I make, what cards I can show up with that are going to be effective. If I'm investing a bunch of mana and I'm not getting any damage or card advantage right off the bat, if it gets bounced, then I'm kind of setting myself up for failure. The more mana I sink in and get my stuff bounced, the worse off I might be. And it's a card I can expect to face not just occasionally, but a good amount of the time. That's certainly how it was last standard, and I don't expect that to change a whole lot. Now the mana got worse, so it's going to be harder to, at least for now, it's going to be harder to just jam Ferry into any old deck, as was kind of possible in the last format. But still, I think we're going to see plenty of Ferry. And there are some new cards that just kind of don't stack up all that well. If it's just on the left, I'm just paying for a body. I mean, even at the low price of 3 mana, relatively low price and a relatively big body, well, it's not perhaps going to be enough if it's just going to try to grow to 8/8 or something. Well, Ferry can bounce that at any point, and it's just not going to be all that exciting. Whenever I talk about how something's matching up, is it past the Ferry test? It's not going to make a card necessarily unplayable, right? I mean, you certainly saw cards getting played in the last standard that weren't necessarily great against Ferry and often got bounced. I mean, I played Feather a bunch, and Feather, if you tap out for Feather against Ferry, it doesn't feel great. People were playing, people were cheating vampires into play and 3/4s. And look, I mean, a lot of that stuff had a triggered ability or an immediate impact so that it would be stronger against Ferry, but it doesn't mean it's completely unplayable. So when I go to this stuff, now something like Giant Opportunity looks pretty cool. For only 3 mana, you can get a 7/7, as long as your other creatures kind of spit out foods incidentally. Otherwise, you generate 3 foods. And this kind of card, like the prospect of a 7/7 token is just so poor against Ferry that this card that might be kind of interesting in a food theme, you just have to think, if I'm up against Ferry, then I guess I'm hoping to use it to get 3 artifacts, and even one of those could get bounced. So again, doesn't make the card unplayable, but certainly it doesn't pass the Ferry test. It's not a card I'm looking to have in my deck if I'm playing against Ferry. And then just stuff that's just like a utility creature that looks kind of cool, this Grum Gully, but that doesn't have haste, doesn't generate the advantage immediately necessarily. It's just kind of, my opponents with Ferry are going to be hoping I do something like that with 3 mana. So to the extent that card would have been playable anyways, but with Ferry even less so. Now, interestingly, Ferry kind of, the fact that it obviously was so warping, it impacts what card is going to print next. Perhaps they already knew this was the most pushed card in the previous set, so it may have already kind of stacked up like this. You've seen this in the past many times. If Delver's the best, we're going to print these other cards. If Bitter Blossom's the best, we'll print some other cards that have pro black and pro blue. The the Stag in the Fairies era. You know, when other cards are Delver's good, you know, I'll print Thragtusk. And so, like, a lot of times what happens next is influenced by what's really good in the moment. Here, I mean, there's only 22 mythics in the set, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them have haste. And that's, I don't think, incidental. I mean, and one of them has haste and hits the opponent and a Planeswalker. I doubt that that's incidental. These are cards that are going to be good against Teferi in the sense that they can just get a Teferi off the board. If they get bounced, they're coming right back in and attacking. It's just part of what it means to play against Teferi is that you want your stuff to have haste if it can, or to have a trigger. This stuff has haste. I think that's going to impact, you know, how these cards fare. I think Questing Beasts are a card people are immediately excited about. Robber the Rich I've seen in a few lists. Rankle I've played against already. So already people are understanding if I'm paying 4 mana for my flyer, haste is almost like a prerequisite, or even 4 mana for my ground beater. It's very different than this Yorvo. Even though it's 1 mana cheaper, they're both maybe attacking on turn 4. The Questing Beast not only has additional relevant abilities, but haste is a really, really important one. And then also a key mechanic. Again, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how incidental it is that this is a good ability against bounce. The ability being adventure. It's good against bounce. I Bone Crusher Giant something. Maybe I even finish off a Teferi with it. Then I play my Bone Crusher Giant. If it gets Teferi, I get to shock something again with the Stomp ability, and then play my creature. You know, if you bounce my Murderous Rider, well, I get my, you know, I get my kill spell back, or my Brazen Bar, or I get my bounce spell back, whatever. My Love Struck Beast, I can keep, you know, keep spitting out a 1/1 token. If you bounce that thing, you know, it's still pretty good against it because it's a 5/5, but I'm going to get 1/1s along the way. Maybe that's good enough, or I'm going to have these 1/1s out. They can chip away at Teferi. So these cards are naturally kind of stack up against Teferi, whether that's by design or incidental. So that matters too. These are some of the, I think, the most powerful cards. And then this leads me into my next card, because I think Bone Crusher Giant is among the cards that's kind of, if it's not intended to be against Ferry, it just is. And so that itself becomes a new kind of test. It's so powerful, this card. It's so powerful. I mean, 2 damage to anything. So like Flame Tongue can only hit creatures. This can go to the face. This can hit a Planeswalker. You get started on turn 2 where, you know, 2 damage is often good enough if people aren't thinking about the Bone Crusher test. Or they're playing some of the cool new cards that might be good anyways, like a Gilded Goose or whatever. That's going to be relevant. And then right on curve, 2 mana, 3 mana, a 4/3 that deals 2 damage on the way out. Just such an impactful creature. There are cards that care about how much power you have out, right? There may be cards that care about having a giant out. Certainly, you know, if I'm going to finish off my opponent with all these food tokens out there, all the incidental damage matters. And so the 2 damage there from the ability, this is just a really powerful card. If they bounce it, or if I raise dead, I get the shock again. So I think this is going to be a really format-defining card, I expect. Decks like red, green, and black, red, even if mono red ends up being underwhelming, which I think it's kind of underperforming right out of the gate, you'll still have this card in those important 2-color decks like red, black, and green, black. Let's take a look at this game that Huey played. This is on the Channel Fireball YouTube channel. So Channel Fireball shows a stream log of Huey playing the new standard format during the kind of pre-release period. So he has to decide here, do I play Zertog Goblin, make it a 3/3 and say go? Or do I play the Sir Farron, the Henge Hammer, which is a 2/2, and then maybe the following turn I might want to play Zertog with haste and then attack for 6 instead of 3. And the reality is, against an opponent who we don't know what they're playing, but they've played a black-red duel turn 1, they're likely to have, they're extremely likely to have 4 Bone Crusher Giant and maybe even 2, 3, or 4 shocks in their deck. I actually think like it might need to be Zertog Goblin, because giving the opponent something to stomp in the first 2 turns and let them curve out that 4/3, which is going to then make our Questing Beast worse. It's going to make our Sir Farron perhaps, or whatever, if I draw another Sir Farron. I mean, it's going to make our Zertog Goblin, you know, perhaps trade. It's just like sets us up poorly if we play something into that in the first 2 turns. The opponent may not have had another turn. So a 3/3 Zertog Goblin is kind of, in this context, quintessentially passing the Bone Crusher test. And then Sir Farron is, you know, unfortunately not. So Huey decided here, and again, this is the first day of the format. I'm not saying he made a mistake and the match doesn't even matter, but he plays Forest Sir Farron, Now pause the video and see if you can figure out what the opponent did in their turn 2. So go ahead and pause the video. Okay, thanks for pausing. Welcome back. Yeah, Huey played Forest or Fair, and the opponent played a land and played Stomp, and then had Bone Crusher Giant for turn 3. So, you know, Zertog Goblin being 3/3 would have complicated what the opponent had to do. Just an example. What are some cards? Like, look, there's Sir Farron, you know, getting his ass stomped. Legion Warboss stomp. This Fabro Elder looks pretty sweet, right? I mean, it's a cool card. Maybe you've got another color permanent out turn 1, turn 2. Yeah, maybe. It's going to be hard with this mana that's in the current set, but if not, stomped. Hero of Precinct 1 stomped. Thief of Sanity stomped. Does that mean all these cards are unplayable? Again, not necessarily, but they don't pass the Bone Crusher test, and that's going to be important for these cards. Let's talk about the Oko test. Oko, the Trickster. Really important card. Everyone's been talking about it. 6 mana, +1, put 2 +1/+1 counters onto 1. Wait, this doesn't look that good. Until end of turn. Alright, that's not the actual Oko. This is the Oko everyone's talking about. Oko, Thief of Crowns. 3 mana for 4 loyalty. Can immediately go to 6, make a food token. +1. It's still ticking up to 5. It's going to make an artifact or creature lose all abilities and become a 3/3. I mean, this card is just, everyone's talking about. Just Bone Crusher Giant, incredibly efficient. Costed at 3 mana, but does so much. Same thing here. And then -5, it's going to have a real impact on, you know, how good 3-power creatures are, because they might get traded off for you know, your food tokens. The food tokens themselves are going to have an impact. So that's the first thing to note, right? Mono Red has to think about cards like Risk Factor that attempt to grind an opponent out. Skewer the Critics is a theme of direct damage, and okay, let me get those last 6 points. Well, if enough of your opponents are playing Oko, that becomes really difficult. A card like Fry, that's intended to get rid of your opponent's most annoying blue or white Planeswalker, doesn't even necessarily get Oko off the board. In addition to, you've already gotten value in the form of a food token. It also just gets the 6 loyalty, which is kind of insane. So this card is extremely aggressively costed in terms of how much loyalty it has, multitude of abilities. Some of the cards we've already talked about that failed the Teferi test, like Thief of Sanity, well, if my opponent's going to be stealing Thief of Sanity a chunk of the time, that's pretty dangerous. In the games where my opponent isn't set up to steal, can just convert it into a 3/3. Also, that's pretty good if you're the Oko player. Giant Opportunity, 7/7 Giant, great, awesome. Well, it could just make, you know, Oko could just make it a 3/3. So the investment's not going to pay off necessarily. And then a 2/2 that has to attack to get value. Well, the opponent's fairly likely to either have a 3/3 to block, or if they can't muster that, they may just trade for it. So, you know, some of the cards that failed the Fairy test are also, those might be particularly weak cards if they're bad against Oko as well. So that's it. I just wanted to get some quick, like, I think you got to talk about in a new format, what are standing out as kind of the clearly good cards that have an impact on which other cards are good. Which creatures do we want to play with? And if I'm looking at building a new deck for this, or picking a deck, or tuning a deck, whatever, I want to look and think about, how does that card that I'm thinking about adding, or the creature I'm thinking about playing, match up against Oko, against Bone Crusher, against Little T. And if I can locate enough cards that are kind of good against all of those are interesting cards that I may be looking to add more of to my deck. So that's something I try to pick up early. I'm not going to yet know exactly what the best Oko deck is. That'll kind of come along as we go. But I can already tell I'm going to need to prepare to play against this card a decent amount. Lastly, my friend's company, PokerRags.us. Check them out. I don't get paid for running this. Just want folks to be aware of it. And if you enjoy the content, subscribe. You'll get a notification. You click the notification bell when I post a new video. So I appreciate that. And see you next time.